In 1487, in the heart of Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital rose in celebration. The great temple, the Templo Mayor, had been rebuilt, expanded, and reconsecrated to the gods who demanded blood in return for the sun itself. For 4 days, drums echoed across the lake, conch shells cried from the causeways, and smoke drifted above a city at the height of its power. Thousands were brought forward for sacrifice. The warriors were captured in battle, prisoners taken in raids, men whose deaths would be remembered as the price of conquest. But among them walked others, women who had not been born to die on a stone altar. Women raised in palaces, taught ritual speech, clothed in fine cotton, and addressed with honor. Women who had once worn crowns. They did not arrive in chains. They were not dragged through the streets. They were led with care, washed, adorned, and treated with a reverence that confused foreign witnesses and reassured the crowds. Because what awaited them was not punishment, it was a procedure. In the Aztec world, sacrifice did not begin at the altar. It began long before, when a captured royal woman ceased to be a person and became something else entirely. A vessel, a symbol, a living debt owed to the gods. Their deaths were not the beginning of their suffering, they were the end. To understand what happened to captured royal women, one must first abandon the comforting idea that the Aztec world was ruled by chaos or blind savagery. It was not. The Aztec Empire was highly ordered, obsessively ritualized, and governed by a worldview in which the survival of reality itself depended on human action. Their cities were planned, their calendars were precise, their priesthood was educated, their laws were enforced. Nothing about sacrifice was spontaneous. At the center of Aztec cosmology was a single terrifying assumption: the universe was fragile. According to their sacred histories, the world had already ended 4 times before. Each previous age had collapsed when the gods grew weak and the cosmic balance failed. The sun did not rise by nature alone. It rose because it was fed. Human blood was not symbolic, it was functional, it was nourishment. The gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world. Humanity, in return, lived under an unpayable debt. Every sunrise was borrowed time. Every harvest was conditional. Every heartbeat existed because something else had already died. In this system, sacrifice was not revenge, it was not moral judgment, it was maintenance, the equivalent of repairing a dam before the flood arrived. A failure to perform the rituals did not offend the gods, it endangered existence itself. This is where modern viewers often misunderstand the Aztec world. Sacrifice was not punishment, it was the administration. Victims were not criminals, many were honored, some were revered, others were transformed into living representations of gods before their deaths. The process was regulated by calendars, overseen by priests, and embedded into state governance. Civilization in this worldview did not oppose cruelty, it organized it. And ritualized cruelty is far more frightening than rage. Rage burns out, but ritual endures. Ritual can be passed down, perfected, and justified across generations. If you're finding this unsettling so far, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more deeply researched history that's rarely taught, and let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. It helps the channel reach others who want to understand the past without illusions. Because in the Aztec Empire, the greatest horrors were committed in moments of anger. They were carried out calmly, publicly, and with absolute conviction that they were necessary. And once a captured royal woman entered this system, mercy was not part of the equation. Once a city fell to the Aztec armies, the fate of its rulers was decided with chilling speed, not by emotion, but by classification. In Aztec society, war captives were not prisoners in the modern sense. They were not held for negotiation, ransom, or exchange. They were designated as offerings. The moment of capture marked a legal and ritual transformation that erased all prior identity. A defeated ruler was no longer a monarch. A noble lineage no longer mattered. Titles, ancestry, and authority dissolved at the instant of conquest. Once captured, royal blood no longer signified power, only value. Aztec warfare itself reflected this logic. Battles were not always fought to annihilate an enemy army. In many cases, they were designed to take captives alive, particularly of high status. The capture of a noble or royal woman carried immense symbolic weight. Such a figure represented not only political victory, but cosmological profit. From that moment forward, the captive ceased to exist as a person under the law. She was entered into a ritual system that treated human beings as state-managed resources. Numbers were recorded, calendars determined timing, temples determined destination. The process was orderly, predictable, and absolute. Nobility did not protect a captive, it intensified her value. A common prisoner might be sacrificed quickly, with little ceremony. A royal woman, by contrast, was too valuable to be wasted. Her blood, her body, and her symbolic status were considered potent offerings, capable of sustaining the gods in ways lesser captives could not. This is where status inversion reached its most disturbing form. The very qualities that had once granted power, heritage, refinement, ritual education, were stripped of political meaning and repurposed entirely. Royal women were no longer treated as leaders, daughters, or heirs. They were treated as assets, allocated according to religious need. The Aztec state did not hide this process, it formalized it. Captives were transferred from military custody to the priesthood. Their care, movement, and eventual fate were no longer determined by generals, but by ritual officials trained to prepare offerings for the gods. Every step followed precedent, every action served a purpose. Dehumanization did not require cruelty in this system, it required administration. By reducing a royal woman to her ritual function, the empire eliminated the possibility of empathy. She was no longer someone with a past or a future. She was a component in a sacred machine designed to keep the universe intact. And once placed inside that machine, escape was no longer a matter of will or resistance. It was a matter of timing. Because for these women, capture did not mark the moment of death. It marked the beginning of a process in which dignity, identity, and agency were methodically removed, long before the altar ever came into view. Not all captives were treated the same. In the Aztec ritual world, gender mattered, not in the sense of mercy or protection, but in symbolic function. Royal women occupied a category that made them uniquely vulnerable, not because they were weak, but because they were considered powerful in a very specific way. Aztec cosmology bound femininity to forces that sustained life itself. Fertility, renewal, agriculture, and the cyclical rebirth of the world were all governed by female deities. The earth was not passive matter, it was a living entity that consumed blood and returned crops in exchange. This made the female body a sacred site, a bridge between humanity and the divine. To the Aztec priesthood, this symbolism was not poetic, it was operational. Royal women in particular were believed to embody concentrated ritual potency. Their noble lineage, ritual education, and ceremonial upbringing marked them as especially suitable vessels for sacred transformation. They were not chosen at random, they were selected with precision. These women were not killed as enemies, they were preserved as instruments. Captured royal women were often removed from the immediate aftermath of battle and placed under priestly supervision. Their treatment could appear on the surface almost reverent. It was not. This care existed for the same reason one carefully maintains a ceremonial object. Damage diminished value. Suffering before the appointed time was wasteful. The goal was not to break the captive, but to maintain her. In many cases, royal women were prepared for sacred impersonation. They were dressed as living representations of goddesses associated with fertility, maize, earth, or renewal. They were taught how to walk, how to speak, and how to conduct themselves as divine embodiments. For a period of time, they were treated not as victims, but as manifestations of the gods themselves. Crowds bowed to them, offerings were presented, priests attended to their needs. But sacred did not mean safe. This temporary elevation was not protection, it was containment. Worship became a form of possession. By transforming a royal woman into a goddess, the Aztec system stripped away what remained of her individuality. She no longer represented herself, her people, or her lineage. She described a cosmic function. This was the final inversion. Power did not shield these women from violence. It refined it. Their bodies became ritual terrain. Their identities were overwritten. Their fate was sealed not by hatred, but by devotion. The reverence surrounding them did not delay death, it made it inevitable. Because in this system, divinity was not an honor that saved lives, it was a role that demanded them. And once a royal woman was chosen to embody the sacred, her survival was no longer considered, only her use. What followed capture was not immediate death. It was a transformation, a process designed to remove the last remnants of personal identity and replace them with something far more useful to the Aztec state and its gods. This was the longest phase, the most deliberate, and for many royal women, the most unbearable. Number 1. Forced cleansing and preparation. The first step was cleansing. Captured royal women were taken away from the noise of conquest and placed under priestly control. They were bathed carefully, sometimes repeatedly, in water infused with ritual herbs. Their hair was washed, their bodies were scrubbed. Any marks of battle, travel, or resistance were removed. This was not an act of compassion. Cleansing was not mercy, it was preparation. Their former clothing, royal garments, regional dress, personal ornaments, were stripped away. These items did not accompany them forward. They belonged to a life that had already ended. In their place, the women were redressed in standardized ritual garments, chosen not for comfort, but for symbolism. From this moment on, they were no longer addressed by personal names. Identity was inefficient, lineage was irrelevant, only function mattered. What remained was a body rendered acceptable for sacred use, purified, neutralized, and ready to be repurposed. Number 2. The God impersonation phase. After cleansing came elevation. Royal women selected for extended ritual roles were transformed into living embodiments of goddesses. They were dressed in elaborate regalia associated with specific deities, fertility goddesses, earth mothers, or figures tied to agricultural renewal and cosmic balance. Their appearance was carefully controlled. Facial paint followed prescribed patterns. Jewelry was symbolic, not decorative. Every color, Every feather, every woven thread had meaning. They were fed well, they were sheltered, they were protected from casual harm. To an outside observer, this phase could look almost humane. It was not. These women were taught ritual speech, formalized phrases spoken during ceremonies. They learned how to move slowly, deliberately in public spaces. They were instructed when to speak and when to remain silent. Their days were structured, their behavior monitored, their role rehearsed again and again. For weeks, or sometimes months, they lived as divinity, fully aware that the ending ended only one way. This was not ignorance, this was not false hope. The ending was fixed from the beginning. The terror did not come from uncertainty, it came from certainty stretched over time. If you're still with us at this point in the story, consider subscribing to the channel. These episodes are the result of long-form research into history's most uncomfortable truths, and subscribing ensures you won't miss what comes next. And if you haven't already, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. These stories travel far, and it matters to know where they're being heard. Number 3. Public reverence. As the ritual calendar advanced, the women were brought into public view, not as prisoners, not as captives, but as sacred presences. Crowds bowed as they passed, offerings were placed at their feet, priests attended them openly, adjusting garments, guiding movements, ensuring that the illusion of divinity remained intact. There were no chains, no guards dragging them forward. The absence of restraint was the restraint. Every step was watched, every gesture had meaning, every moment reinforced the same truth. Escape was neither expected nor imagined. This public reverence served a critical function. It conditioned the population to accept what was coming. By teaching people to worship the woman first, the state ensured that her death would be perceived not as murder, but as fulfillment. For the royal women themselves, this stage completed the transformation. They were no longer treated as enemies. They were no longer treated as people. They existed in a suspended state, neither living in the ordinary sense, nor yet dead, revered, fed, and honored, while being slowly erased. This was psychological torture refined into ritual, a living countdown measured not in days, but in ceremonies, a life preserved only so it could be ended correctly. By the time the final festival approached, the woman who had once been a queen no longer belonged to herself, her family, or her people. She belonged entirely to the gods. And once that point was reached, there was nothing left to save. Up to this point, the process has been described as a system, but systems are built on people. To understand the full weight of what ritual transformation meant, we must turn to the fragmentary cases that survived in the historical record, not as biographies, but as traces. What remains are not full lives, but outlines preserved by conquest, colonial documentation, and archaeology. The most striking feature shared by these cases is not how much we know, it is how much we do not. Case 1. A captured Mixtec princess. In the Florentine Codex, compiled under the supervision of Bernardino de Sahagún in the 15th century, there are descriptions of noble women taken during campaigns against southern city-states, such as the Mixtec and Zapotec polities. The texts record their capture, they record their ritual preparation, and they record the festivals in which they were used. But they do not record their names. These women are identified only by function: the woman who embodied the goddess, the offering from the south, the noble captive. Their lineage, once carefully preserved in Mixtec pictorial manuscripts, vanishes the moment they enter Aztec custody. Archaeological evidence supports this silence.
High-status female remains discovered near temple precincts show ceremonial treatment, careful positioning, ritual objects, and indications of prolonged preparation before death. The bodies were preserved according to religious protocol, the identities were not. The woman's values survived, her personhood did not. Case 2. A Tlaxcalan noblewoman. Tlaxcala, Rome's future ally against the Aztecs, was for generations one of their most bitter enemies. Captives taken from Tlaxcalan nobility were considered especially potent offerings because they came from a people who resisted Aztec domination. Diego Duran, writing in the late 16th century, describes noble captives prepared for sacrifice who were treated with formal reverence and displayed publicly before major festivals. He notes that some women were elevated into god impersonation roles, receiving ritual instruction and ceremonial care. Again, no names. These women were not remembered as individuals because remembrance would have disrupted the ritual logic. To remember a lineage would be to acknowledge a political reality that no longer existed. Erasure was not an accident, it was necessary. When these women disappeared, their families disappeared with them. No descendants recorded, no return to their people, no grave marked with a personal name. Only the god remained. Case 3. The royal hostage from a conquered city. In several archaeological temple burials beneath the Templo Mayor, researchers have uncovered female remains accompanied by regalia associated with goddesses rather than mortal status. These burials were not mass graves, they were singular.
The women buried there were not anonymous to the state. They were anonymous to history. Spanish chroniclers noted that some captives were held for extended periods, becoming familiar figures within ritual life before being sacrificed during major calendrical events. Sahagún records that the people mourned these figures, not as women, but as embodiments of the divine whose time had come. The mourning was ritualized, the loss was expected, the person was already gone. If you're finding this story compelling, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. These episodes are the result of long-form research into history's most uncomfortable truths, and subscribing ensures you won't miss what comes next. What unites all of these cases is not their suffering alone. It is the silence that follows. The gods they embodied were remembered, named, and honored for centuries. Temples were rebuilt, festivals repeated, codices copied and preserved. But the women who became those gods vanished completely. History remembers gods, not the women who became them. Their bodies were preserved with care. Their identities were destroyed with precision. And that destruction was not collateral damage. It was the final, essential step of the ritual itself. The final night did not arrive suddenly. It was anticipated. By the time the ritual calendar reached its appointed date, everyone involved already knew what would happen next: the priests, the city, and the woman herself. The terror of uncertainty had long passed. What remained was something colder and more difficult to endure: acceptance enforced by ritual. As night fell over Tenochtitlan, preparations began quietly. The last ritual meal. The woman was given a final ceremonial meal, not a prisoner's ration, but food prepared according to religious custom: maize, cacao, and ritual dishes associated with the deity she had embodied. Priests supervised every detail. The meal was not indulgent, but symbolic. She was not being comforted. She was being completed. Eating marked her full integration into the role she had been assigned. To refuse would have been unthinkable, not because of punishment, but because the ritual no longer belonged to her. Even hunger had become ceremonial. Singing in the darkness. As the night deepened, singing began. Not the cries of grief one might expect, but measured chants. Priests recited hymns learned over generations. Drums kept a slow, steady rhythm that carried across the water and into the surrounding neighborhoods. The sound was not frantic, it was controlled, familiar. This was not a city on the brink of violence, it was a city following a schedule. Within the temple precinct, the woman remained visible. Attendants stayed close, adjusting garments, ensuring the illusion of divinity remained unbroken. She was not alone, but she was utterly isolated, surrounded by people who no longer recognized her as human. Outside, families gathered. Children were brought to watch. This was not hidden, it was not whispered about, it was shared. The crowd did not scream, they sang. The procession began. At first light, the procession formed. The woman was led forward, not pushed. There were no restraints, no visible force. Priests walked beside her, guiding her pace, ensuring the ritual remained orderly. The crowd parted respectfully as she passed. People bowed, some touched the ground, others raised offerings. Participation was not optional. Attendance was a civic act. To witness was to affirm the order of the world. The streets were quiet. There was no chaos, no disorder, only movement toward a destination that everyone understood. The slow ascent. At the base of the great temple, the steps waited. They rose steeply, cutting into the sky above the city. From below, the climb appeared almost ceremonial in its difficulty. Each step slowed the pace. Each pause extended the moment. This ascent was deliberate. It allowed the crowd to see. It allowed the priests to measure time. It allowed the ritual to unfold exactly as it always had. From above, the city stretched out, canals, rooftops, causeways, and crowds filling every visible space. This was the empire witnessing itself. For the woman, this was the final transformation. She had already been erased as a person. She had already been accepted as sacred. Now she was being delivered. No one rushed, no one resisted. The calm was complete. This was not violence erupting. It was violence normalized, absorbed into song, ceremony, and shared belief. And when the top of the temple finally came into view, there was no need to explain what would happen next. Everyone already knew. Because long before the sacrifice itself, the world had already agreed that it was necessary. The sacrifice itself was brief, carried out with the same precision that had governed every stage before it, and it unfolded not as an outburst of violence, but as the formal completion of a process already long underway. Surrounded by priests and framed by ritual chant, the woman's life was offered according to prescribed rites meant to sustain the gods and preserve the balance of the world. Her role fulfilled exactly as the calendar demanded. There was no chaos, no interruption, no deviation, only the final transition from sacred embodiment to offering, witnessed by a city that understood the act not as cruelty, but as necessity. What mattered was not the moment itself, but everything that led to it, the cleansing, the elevation, the reverence, and the slow erasure that transformed a living person into a ritual function long before the ceremony reached its end. When the ceremony ended, the city moved on. The drums fell silent, the crowds dispersed. Daily life resumed beneath the shadow of the temple, as it always had. What remained of the woman who had embodied the sacred did not return to her people. There was no homecoming, no mourning by family, no record of survival or death in the way history usually understands it. Her body was either displayed or buried depending on the ritual calendar and the deity involved. In some cases, remains were placed in temple precincts as consecrated offerings, positioned carefully alongside ritual objects that signified divine function rather than human identity. In others, the body was removed from public view entirely, absorbed into the sacred architecture of the city, hidden, sealed, and silent. From parts of these offerings, ritual objects were created. Skins became ceremonial garments, bones were fashioned into implements used in later rites. These objects were preserved, repaired, and reused over generations, their sacred purpose meticulously documented. But the woman herself was not. Her name was never recorded. If it had existed in her homeland's oral tradition or pictorial records, it ended here. Colonial chroniclers listed numbers, categories, and ceremonies. Archaeology reveals placement, posture, and symbolism. Nowhere do we find the personal marker that would restore individuality. Lineage followed the same path. Royal families that had once traced descent through generations simply stopped appearing in the record. No marriages noted, no heirs listed, no return of a daughter who had been taken. The political and biological line ended not with defeat in battle, but with ritual absorption. This was the final efficiency of the system. Death alone was insufficient. Memory had to be eliminated. By erasing names, the empire ensured that no grievance could be inherited. By erasing lineage, it prevented the future from remembering an alternative past. The gods remained eternal, the rituals continued, the women vanished. Death is not the erasure, forgetting is. And so the Aztec world preserved the sacred and discarded the human, leaving behind temples, codices, and artifacts that speak endlessly of gods and ceremonies, while the lives that sustained them remain unreachable, not lost by accident, but removed deliberately until nothing remained but silence. The Aztec Empire did not rely on ignorance, it relied on participation. Every citizen, every family, every child who watched the rituals unfold understood the system. They bowed, they sang, they offered tribute, they accepted the cost, not because they were coerced in that moment, but because society had been structured to normalize it over generations. Consider what kind of civilization can simultaneously create beauty, precision, and terror. How easily order and cruelty can coexist when each act of devotion also enforces hierarchy and power. These were not aberrations or accidents. They were instruments of governance, sustained by belief, ritual, and collective consent. And then consider the women themselves, the queens, princesses, and noble captives, whose lives were erased not only through death, but through silence, leaving history to remember gods, ceremonies, and empires, but not the people who embodied them. If you found this story compelling, subscribe to the channel to explore more hidden histories and untold truths from civilizations across the world. Leave a comment below and let us know which city you're watching from. Your voice helps keep these stories alive. Share this video with others who appreciate history's uncomfortable truths. Because the lessons of ritual, power, and memory are not just ancient, they resonate wherever humans seek to normalize the extraordinary at the expense of the individual. Civilization and cruelty are not opposites. Sometimes they are the same system viewed from different angles.